Imperial Lounge presents an icon.
Reggae dancehall by the beach. To be held at Imperial Lounge, 2 to 14 High Street, Margate Seafront, Kent, CT9 118. To be held on the first Saturday of each month. Your host DJ Matt. Also rotating DJs, Roger Boone, DJ Happy,
and Younger General.
Doors open 8 p.m. till late. Free entry all night. Music policy, reggae dancehall and a touch of soul. On the first Saturday of each month. Reggae dancehall by the beach. At the Imperial Lounge Margate. Do remember you can also get VIP and Shisha booking. More info on the World Jam Global website. That's www.worldjamglobal.com. Also www.imperialloungemargate.co.uk.
See you there.
It's the right thing you doing. Rebellious like 1, 2, 3, swing it.
Do you have an old sound tape or your favorite cassette tape that you want converted to CD or MP3 format? Do you need a demo CD, radio ad, a DJ or even a sound system for your wedding, birthday or special occasion? Then why not get in contact with KTR Records on 07931 152 448 or check out our website on www.ktrrecords.com. We have been in business since 2004 and also undertake community projects. So for your remixes, doublets and all your sound editing needs, why not contact KTR Records, official sponsor of World Jam Global Radio. KTR Records, coming your way. Do you like music like this?
Great music all the time.
Or like this?
The music you love.
Maybe this.
Great music that makes you want to turn up the volume loud.
Or life track like this.
Especially where human life is concerned. Surely, sooner or later, people will realize that lives actually matter.
Then you're in the right place. Keep it locked to World Jam Global, where music is harmony.
Music 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Yeah, you're a World Jam. Hotter than them.
See live schedule.
You see, it's here. You see. New feature coming from World Jam Global Radio in 2018. World Jam Global Top 10. To vote for your favorite artist, go to twitter.com/World Jam Global or facebook.com/World Jam Global. So pick the right track where you want to have in your car, at your house, a rock. At them.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Oh, hang fire, we got another fully loaded show for you today. It's Saturday, it's 6 o'clock. World Jam Global Radio's Issues Today going out live. My name is Kervin Julian, and I've got a plethora of quality guests to introduce to you very shortly.
I already did.
Stand by.
I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime. Back in the day, I didn't really care about the system. It was all about survival. It was do or die. I had too many rivals. I was too young and foolish to stay in school. I learned my lessons in the streets. There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Big shout outs go down to Francisco Lopez, Frankie Norman from across the waters, Wayne Shorts from here in the UK, and the legendary Sandra Dawn.
I was a drug dealer, so more drugs.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we got a show lined up for you today. We are live, going out right across the waters from Coventry, United Kingdom. And my guests today include my former co-host and dear friend, Dr. David Romay.
Thinking over since I've gotten older, the life I used to live.
We have Yolanda McNair once again,
My brain was so
Alex Salazar, Jerry Summers,
I was nobody's chump.
and Jonathan Newton.
I'm in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I
The Voice of the Nation, Part 2, United Against Brutality. And after the recent success of the last show that we had, we thought we'd bring these strong minds together one more time again, so we can discuss the issues that matter.
already did my time.
So stand by for another explosive show, and stand by for another
Pay for my crime.
long-awaited intro from Dr. David Romay.
My crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime. Already did my time.
You can catch us on www.worldjamglobalradio.com.
My time. I paid for
You can follow us on Facebook,
I'm trying to get this felony
on Twitter,
so I can get
and all social
and have the right
network
to vote and
platforms.
live like an ordinary citizen again. This is my message to all of my.
Get us on the Issues Today page, the World Jam Global Radio page,
There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on
and almost every miscarriage of justice,
girls.
police brutality, or wrongful conviction group that you can find.
Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed
I
man.
want to thank you to our audience listening from right across the world,
Life is too short.
wherever you may be.
Jail.
And if there's any questions going on that you might want to throw in there,
Already,
then please just drop it into the message box right there on Facebook while we're live.
already,
I'll see it, I'll ask it, and hopefully one of our guests will be able to answer it.
already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling
For this lineup of guests, we discuss the Officers' Bill of Rights and challenge its standing in today's climate,
stupid shit.
with police brutality at an all-time high and no transparency from the judiciary.
Used to live
It is time for change.
dumb. My brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd shoot you up
All right, we're gonna get ready.
like a real alligator, especially all you haters.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, would you do me the honor of just welcoming my dear friend and former co-host, Dr. David Romay. Hi, David. How are you?
Kervin, I'm so glad to be with you from Connecticut, where I can see the New York skyline not far off, and know that you're across the pond fighting for freedom throughout the world and spreading the good news that there is hope and there's no reason for desolate thoughts in this time of the deplorable Trump era. Let me begin by telling you how it is in America. But first, let me say thank you to my co-guests today, Jerry, Jonathan, Alex, and Yolanda. I'm very honored to be with you here today. And if I say anything that you think is over the top, forgive me, because I want it to be double over the top. Now, Trump is a liar. Everything has to begin with that premise. Donald John Trump is a liar. He is a liar. He has already lied over 5,000 times. He's a bankrupt. He's bankrupted 5 times. Now he says, somebody's typing, he says that bankruptcy is quite all right. But bankruptcy is basically going to federal court and saying, I can't pay my bills. And those workers who put in windows in my Taj Mahal, and those men who cut my grass, and those plumbers who cleared out the toilets, and those cement workers, and everybody else who did an honest day's of work, I'm asking the court to say, I don't have to pay them now, because I'm a billionaire and I'm exempt. So to me, bankruptcy is theft when it is done with the intent of depriving other people of their lawful earnings. He's also a coward. He's a coward who avoided his duty in Vietnam. Now, there's nothing wrong with not wanting to go to Vietnam. I wasn't old enough, but I don't know what I would have done. I opposed the war. But Muhammad Ali, a great African American named Cassius Clay in those days, refused to go to Vietnam because he saw no reason to kill little Asian people, as he called them, but to kill Asian people while black people in this country were oppressed themselves. So what did he do? He stood up like a man and said, I'm not going to Vietnam. And he went to jail and he lost all of his honors. But he got him back in the end because he did the right thing. But Donald Trump, no. Daddy went to the draft board, got a doctor to sign a note and said he had problems with his bone spurs. Bone spurs. The healthiest man ever to be president of the United States of America. The man who his doctor said has the body of a 20-year-old had bone spurs. Well, when I was 17, I went in the United States Army and I had brain spurs, but I managed. Now, on to Kavanaugh. This man, an elite, privileged molester, allegedly, of a 15-year-old girl while he was a senior at a high school in the suburbs of Washington that cost $60,000 a year to attend. Now think of that, $60,000 a year. Harvard is $52,000. Yale is $54,000. $60,000 a year to go to a high school. And this man, in the greatest tradition of the president who nominated him to the Supreme Court, lied about torture when he worked for George W. Bush, lied about receiving stolen emails from members of the U.S. Senate who were Democrats, and lied when he discussed Trump's collusion with members at Kazowitz's law firm, is not only unworthy, but he is unfit and undeserving to be on the Supreme Court of the United States. Any man, when he's 17 years old, who takes a 15-year-old girl, tries to rape her, molest her in her bathing suit, puts his hand over her mouth, and puts his dirty, filthy, grimy hands all about her body, is undeserving to sit on the Supreme Court. And Trump is going to dirty that noble institution no less than he has made a sewer of the White House. Now, while we look at America, Israel is killing hundreds of Palestinians in Gaza. They have rounded about the fences and demonstrated for the basic necessities of life: water, food, plumbing, housing, schools. And no one says a word in America, and few in Europe. And in the meantime, Jared Kushner, the great Messiah, the Messiah of heaven and Israel and everywhere else, he's going to have the greatest peace policy ever to come about from the bowels of the United States. And what has he done? Made Jerusalem, contrary to United Nations law, the capital of Israel. He has punished the Palestinians by holding up their money for food and water and medicine, and he has removed from the United States Palestinian representation. I ask you, how can you possibly make peace when you starve people, when you kick them out of your country, when you deprive them of representation, and when you steal their land and call it your own capital? How then do you propose to make peace? You cannot make peace. And these hard-line Zionists have no clue about peace. And what is deplorable and depraved is that they do not want peace. They want ethnic cleansing, and they want land, and they want victory over humanity itself. It is raw power. And we see the beginning of the end with America's exit from the Middle East, Russia's entry, Iran's determination, Saudi Arabia's failed war in Yemen, and Israel's determination to have a Masada #2. That is a nationwide suicide by insanity and greed. God help us. The president of Poland was in America this week, and he asked Trump to send another 5,000 troops to Poland, and he promised in return to name a military base Fort Trump. Trump wet his pants. He was so excited. Now, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Israel are in an ongoing alliance of evil with the assistance of the Trump administration to commit massive, grotesque, malicious genocide and cultural demolition in the 3,000-year-old civilization of Yemen. And the world is silent. North Korea has Trump under its fat little toe with the help of China, and Republicans love it. There's a secret war in Africa with American soldiers in Mali, Chad, and Niger, which no one speaks about because they're too worried about Trump's latest attack upon the press. And Vladimir Putin, Tsar Vladdy, continues to attempt the rebuilding of a czarist empire, but will fail because Russia is nothing more than a huge fuel dump with people who don't even get freedom. And it is sad. Russia's economy is smaller than that of New York State, and its population is 150, half of America's, and 1/6 of Europe's. And he pretends as though he is an emperor going about Syria and other places in the world. And Hungary and Poland, speaking of Europe, have moved right. And Germany, Sweden, and Italy are on their way. All this because of immigration? No. It is about oppression, racism, money, fear, and the encouragement of the imperial presidency of Donald John Liar, bankrupt, draft-dodging Trump. The trade war Trump has initiated will lead to increased poverty, increased anger and rebellion, and ultimately upheavals throughout the world. We will be on the verge of anarchy, chaos, and then you will see the bloody wars come about. Let me wrap up with the issue of justice. Justice is the most fundamental requirement for civilization itself. Without justice, humans resort to self-defense and self-offense. And ultimately, there is nothing but man killing man, woman killing woman, and children killing children. There will be the eye for the eye and the tooth and tooth of the primitive post-Noah Hyde flood in the world. And in this context, we must consider the United States today, formerly the beacon of peace and justice. Almost 5 million Americans in prison, more than the rest of the world combined, who are mostly minorities and people of color. Trump's attacks upon the organs of law and order, a Justice Department totally corrupt and threatened, and lawyers who are far more concerned with their power, prestige, and fortunes than with their responsibilities as officers of the court, national justice. And finally, so long as prosecutors and district attorneys in the United States and the police servants who worship at their feet suffer zero consequences for misconduct, malicious intent, murder, stealing, lying, and political crimes, they will be on the further decline and the fall of the American empire. Police are protected by the prosecutors, and they are the first who we see offend. But remember, the real problem is never the police. The real problem is no more than the police than a dog in your neighbor's yard biting people. The real problem is the prosecutors and the communities who support those prosecutors, who fail to hold those in uniform with deadly weapons responsible, because they are the foremen of the ground troops who are charged with protecting the elite classes who go to high schools at $60,000 a year and become the justices that defend the prosecutors that offend our nation's liberty and deprive our citizens of their rights. And that's the way it is in America.
Oh, thank you very much for that, David. Been a long while since we've heard from you, and that was a great comeback. Let's go straight to Yolanda McNair and let her introduce herself and remind you as an audience who she is and what she does right here. How are we doing, Yolanda?
Hi, I'm doing pretty good. I'm the mother of Adacia Miller. My daughter was killed by a Detroit police officer one day before her 25th birthday. all she was doing was out celebrating her upcoming birthday, and it just happened to be that someone brought her to a party at the police officer's home. He was off duty, carrying his service weapon. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah,
Just getting Jonathan back in.
What happened?
Okay, Yolanda's just doing her introduction there, Jonathan.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but throughout my struggle, it's been 6 years. I've created an organization called Post, Protect Our Stolen Treasures. I'm the president of that organization. We have multiple chapters in different states. We are fighting for police accountability. They do not deserve special rights. Their job is something that they chose to do. It's not something pushed upon them. And in my struggle and in my fight, I help families all across the United States.
Well, it's great to hear about you, Yolanda, and we're going to look forward to what you're going to contribute to today's show in a follow-up to the one that we had just a couple of weeks ago. Next, let me just introduce very quickly Alex Salazar, former Los Angeles law enforcement officer. How are you doing, Alex?
Great. How are you today, Kervin? I'm just so happy to be here. And, I'm a former Los Angeles police officer who worked in the notorious Rampart division after the academy. Rampart was the focus, the basis for the movie Training Day, which won Best Picture and Best Actor for Denzel Washington. And so, the LAPD was always seen as the godlike police department in the United States and in the world for its involvement in Hollywood, Adam 12, Dragnet, and a lot of the storied, cop stories. But underneath all that, there always has been present, the white supremacy aspect of it. I myself was able to see that. I worked with partners, even family members, and even in the end, ultimately myself, I developed this really dangerous attitude, which is, systemic. We now know in today's national law enforcement, and to have people like Yolanda having organizations to make aware of this mentality, I think is crucial. So I just kind of bring that viewpoint. I'm also a private investigator. I conduct high-profile investigations into the shootings and murders of victims. And I'm an activist now too, and I stand with the people, but I also stand with trying to help police officers that are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, who are experiencing mental breakdowns. And you combine that with, the current police culture, it's not a nice picture.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And we've got two more to introduce very quickly. Again, Jerry Summers, former chief of police, Idaho, and an author and a dear friend. How are you doing, Jerry?
Great, Kervin. Thanks for having me on. I'm honored to be on with these distinguished guests of yours. I am a former chief of police. I'm a doctoral candidate student in criminal justice. I understand the power and the corruption that goes about and holding people in authority to the same standard that the average citizen has to be held to. I lost my job as a chief of police for holding my city manager, my initial boss, accountable for the same laws that we were enforcing on the average citizen. That resulted in retaliation and a firing of mine and a ruining of my career. I then filed a lawsuit in federal court, in district court, and prevailed on 2 counts of retaliation with a civil judgment, but it still ruined my.
Thank you very much for that, Jerry. Finally, and at least not very much not last, I think we just lost Jerry towards the end of that, but that's fine. He'll be back very shortly. Legal scholar and former law enforcement officer, Mr. Jonathan Newton. How are you doing, sir?
Doing good. Thanks for having me. I'm honored and privileged to be on with the rest of the guests and the colleagues of mine in this work. My name is Jonathan Newton. I am a soon-to-be licensed lawyer in the state of Maryland, hopefully, and I head up the National Association Against Police Brutality. I have been involved with police accountability since 2014. And we connect victims of police misconduct with legal, spiritual, and wellness help. And we try to educate the community on the status of the law, what needs to change, and how to go about creating that change. So we believe in education leads to empowerment, and empowerment leads to accountability. And you will not get to accountability without empowerment, and you will not get to empowerment without education. And so I'm glad to be a part of this conversation today in any way we can expand the dialogue to be able to educate and empower communities.
Well, once again, I thank each and every single one of you for taking your time out to be here on this show today. United Against Brutality, the Voice of the Nation, Part 2. But just before we started the show, Jonathan, you and Alex embarked on a conversation that I had to stop you on because I felt it was vitally important that we brought that to the table while we were talking. Do you guys want to just run back through that again?
Sure. I mean, Alex brought up a really good point. Alex, tell him your point again.
Well, you know, I mean, I think that when we start having these discussions, we need to not so much it's changing the laws or better training. Rather, it's always been the mindset of trying to change the leadership and the culture of law enforcement, I believe. And having people like Jerry, who lost his job, is the tragic example. When you have a good cop, they don't stick around too long because they start holding accountable the hypocrites. And the hypocrites, of course, they don't like that. And so what do? They silence people. And this is what we're up against here, is that we have sheriffs, we have police chiefs in very high positions. And as you mentioned, we really need to get on the council people, the mayors, and elect these individuals that have a heart, that realize that this stuff is going on because it's just at epidemic levels, of course.
Yeah.
And I was echoing that thought and talking about how we need to. There's a campaign going on right now it's called Real Justice with Sean King, and he's bringing attention to the various prosecutorial races that are going on across the country through radio shows and town hall meetings and so forth. And we need to do the same thing when it comes to our sheriff's elections. We also need to do the same things when it comes time to appoint police chiefs. Police chiefs are generally appointed by the mayor of a city, and they serve at the pleasure of the mayor. And we, at this moment, don't really have a concerted effort to bring awareness to and bring pressure to leadership in policing. And so I would hope that we start bringing awareness to the idea of if you want to have better policing, you've got to have better leadership in policing. And so I agree with Alex on that, and hopefully we can, bring awareness towards adding the police chiefs and sheriffs to the dialogue when it comes to the Real Justice Project.
Well, wow, I'm glad you lot raised that, and the fact that we've got Jerry Summers here, here's an opportunity to ask the question: why is it that police chiefs are picked by mayors, and does that not open the door to corruption from the very get-go?
Well, I don't know if you wanted me to handle that, Kervin, or if you wanted somebody else to handle that.
No, I was going to send that to you, Jerry, as a former chief of police, and then we'll throw it out there for everybody else to jump in.
In the United States, sheriffs are elected and police chiefs are appointed. Why that is, I don't know. Maybe somebody with a legal background can give me a better definition of that. But in my case, you're either appointed by the mayor or the city manager if you're in a city manager form of government. In my case, I was involved in a city manager form of government. So the city manager or the mayor appoints you, and you're then confirmed by the city council through an examination process, opposed to being elected by the community like a sheriff. So it's easier to remove a chief of police than it is a sheriff as well.
But then if the chief of police decides to play ball with the mayor, then it's going to be very difficult to remove him, right?
No, well, the mayor, as long as the mayor and the city council aren't fighting, if the city council is opposing the mayor and the chief of police aligns with that mayor, then that's a political alignment. The converse of that is true as well. If you have a sitting sheriff that's elected and they decide to go do whatever they want to do and oppose the general electorate, it requires a impeachment to get rid of the sheriff, or they have to do so at the next election and at the ballot box.
Jonathan, come on, Alex.
let me step in just a bit and talk about first off the way that we've gotten to appointed police chiefs and elected sheriffs. In most of the municipalities and cities are set up to mimic our constitutional form of government, and so when you see at the federal level, you will see we have an executive who executes the laws. We have a legislative body called Congress that creates the laws, and then we have a judicial branch that interprets the laws. When you look at law enforcement, even like with Attorney General Jeff Sessions, he is appointed. He would effectively be the chief of police, other than the FBI director. Those are appointed positions. In the federal government, we have FBI directors are appointed by statute. And so what happens is he has a little bit of protection where the administration itself doesn't have so much control over an FBI director as they would, say, a chief of police would be controlled by a city council. And so at the city council levels, what you see is you don't have those protections that for a chief of police. And so generally what happens is that the chief of police feels endeared to play ball or do the bidding of the mayor or the city council. But to answer the question in terms of why we have that, is the mayor is the one who is tasked with, at most cities, with executing the law, the charter of the city. And so in that execution, he can appoint a police chief, and that's basically how that's happened. That police chief, and they also appoint solicitor generals, which are like an attorney general, and the police chief is almost like the functional equivalent of an FBI director for a city. And so you see that replication of sort of the structure down to the city level. And
Alex,
that's what's happening.
Alex, this is David.
Yes,
Kevin, let me jump in on the history for just 1 second. You know, I did study history. The sheriff in a lot of states are required by the Constitution to be elected. And the idea of a sheriff is actually from your country, the United Kingdom. When the colonists came to America, they first elected a sheriff in Virginia. And the word itself comes from a shire, like a British shire, which includes forest and counties and cities. And they were called shire reeves, which mean like shire protectors. And the shire reeves became sheriffs, sheriff. And so a sheriff is elected because he's seen to represent a greater geographical area. Some counties, for example, Texas has counties that are bigger than the state of Connecticut. My state, which has 3,000 square miles, there are counties in Texas that are 6,000 square miles. So a sheriff is a large geographical area, and he's seen to be it's more important to have him be a representative of the voters because they're so diverse in geography. Whereas a city is far more compact, and police come out of the Greek word polis, a city-state, and that was first brought about by the English, and then in America, as you know, we've talked about this before. And so they're a more compact area, and they're seen to be kind of, as Alex was saying, subject to the chief executive, which may be, as Jerry said in Idaho, subject to the mayor or city manager. Okay, so that's that.
Yeah, so again, the question, gone, traditionally, but still, the question still, when you've got a chief of police who is appointed by a mayor, and I'm just throwing it out there, does it leave a bigger room for corruption?
I think less, because a city councilor and a city manager and a mayor is going to be watching a policeman far more closely, or a police chief far more closely than a sheriff is watched, because the sheriff, in his mind, is a sovereign being. He's elected by the glorious people. The people elected me. He's not answerable to any specific person. He would have to be unelected, so to speak. So he is far more subject, and you have all these old television shows where you see the famous Southern sheriff, or in the case of Arizona, Joe Arpaio, who got a pardon from Trump. These sheriffs think they're above the law. They control the jails, the prisons. They get all this business. They buy food. They buy clothes. They're subject to bribery. They are far more subject to corruption than a police chief who's very minutely watched by someone whose future in politics is dependent on how he treats that police chief, one way or the other.
Well, Dr. Romay, this is Alex. I just want to jump in really quick to
Sure.
echo what you're saying. Nowhere is that more vivid right now in the city of Angels, Los Angeles, where the past couple of years we've had the conviction of the former head of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, Lee Baca, and his underling, his number 2 sheriff, who's currently in the federal pen, along with the head of internal affairs. The nation's largest jail system, the Sheriff's Department of Los Angeles, is involved in this turmoil. And right now we're in the midst of an election here between a sheriff, the current sheriff, a former LAPD commander whom I worked under, and also this guy that I'm actually supporting by the name of Alex Villanueva, who was part of the crew that took down this bad sheriff because these deputies were getting tattoos for breaking arms and for torturing people and engaging in massive on-duty conduct, where they themselves have been the subject of a recent Los Angeles Times investigation into the gangs of police, if you can believe that. And so this culture was created, again, by leadership, and it has its genesis, its roots in the white supremacy movement that has always been present. And especially when you go back and you start talking about England, that's where the king and these people who thought that they were just better than everybody, they had this doctrine, and even to the point where I guess King Henry VIII, and correct me here or maybe perhaps elaborate, he wanted to be the damn Pope at one point. He said, I want to cheat, I want to kill my wives and do whatever the heck I want, and supposedly, that's how America was created, through that crazy madness. But it has its roots there. And so that's what I saw, as a police officer working under Daryl Gates, who said that black people weren't normal, and everybody was like forced to believe that. And all this in response to numerous blacks being killed by officers using the carotid chokehold. That's why it was made illegal, this chokehold that killed Eric Garner and so many people, because it kills them. And it was used predominantly with blacks, and because blacks are strong and what have you, it would take a lot more for these guys, to have 5 guys on one person here, in some cases, when they were on PCP, to subdue them. But it would go to that point that is, where he began doing a lot of the labeling and causing this fear that was very common among the law enforcement officers.
Well, to answer Kervin's question, Alex, and I think you make a good point. Kervin, as you know, the root of a great deal of evil begins with money. And you have to consider who controls more money, the sheriff or a police chief. And even a police chief in a huge city like Chicago or LA is not going to control the money of Cook County or Orange County or LA County. These people control, the sheriff controls the jails. And that's a multi-$100 billion activity. And even in the 1800s and 1900s, the sheriffs were involved in deep corruption by letting the prisoners, forcing the prisoners could go to work for local businesses and lumber yards and chicken yards and pig farms. And they put these prisoners on those farms, and the sheriffs got huge financial kickbacks. Now they get their kickbacks by letting Coca-Cola come in, or Snickers bars come in, or King of the Fruit Loop Sardine Company come in, and they sell these products to prisoners who have nothing but hot dogs and beans to eat all day long, probably 1,000 calories to eat, unless they buy the food from the concession. And that's how they make the money. And a phone call, like right now on Skype, that we're doing for free, those men in prison have to pay $3 and $4 a minute to speak to their children, to their mothers. All that money goes somewhere. And the sheriff is the beginning of the funneling of that money out to other politicians.
You know, this really opens up a whole can of worms as far as corruption is concerned. But last time when we visited this subject, we kind of finished up on the area of representation, right, which Jonathan was quite strong and positive on, as far as individuals needing the right form of representation. You know, people that specialized in their area of prosecution, for example. But when we're looking at the accountability and the transparency of it all, do we need to start going lower down the line and starting from the foundation up, or do we work from the top coming down? And I'll throw that back to you, Jonathan, if I can.
I mean, I would say both, but I think that in order for us to get accountability, we actually have to change some laws, and that's a political process. Right now, there's absolutely no incentive for an officer not to do something wrong to a citizen. And when there's no incentive, there's no consequences, you can expect those numbers to remain the same. There have been 723 police killings in 2018 so far. There have been 107 police deaths in 2018 so far, and only 40 of those deaths are related to gunfire. But so we have a situation in America where police really aren't investigated very well once a police shooting takes place. They're not investigated independently, I should say. And so the transparency element, you know, Jerry could talk about this as far as what needs to be done, but you know, there's no incentive for an officer not to do some of the things that they've been doing out on the streets. There's no consequences to their actions. Very rarely is an officer prosecuted for beating or shooting or killing somebody in America.
But that goes into, Jonathan, that goes into what I said in my initial statement. This is David. That the problem there, Jonathan, is, the law is very clear. If a policeman acts in a way that is contrary to the rules, regulations, and laws of his department and state or city, he has to be punished. The problem is the prosecutors who wear badges themselves. A district attorney is also a policeman. He can arrest people. He has a badge. They don't enforce the law.
I'm going to push back a little bit because the laws, almost every single one of them, has an escape hatch for officers not to get prosecuted. And it's there's really, if you really take a deep dive into police accountability and look at the laws that are there, the use of force laws that are in every state. Look at Georgia in particular. That's where I was a peace officer at, and look at the law. And when an officer is legally justified in using deadly force, if you want, you will find that law is so abstract that it creates a situation where an officer can use deadly force whenever he wants to. Ditto that for Florida. And so when it gets to the level of a prosecutor, prosecutors will tell you through some of their prosecutorial counsel. Now, I will say that there is probably no great number of prosecutors who just run and jump at the opportunity to charge and prosecute a police officer. But I'm not going to take the next step and say that, you know, that prosecutors are the sole blame to them not being charged. The laws as they're written right now don't really allow for us to get solid convictions out of police officers, because there's almost always an escape hatch dealing with the level of intent that an officer has to display during the shooting.
Okay, Jonathan,
let me just jump in 1 second on that, and then I don't mean to jump in. But that applies to every law in America. You have to have criminal intent for everything in America except murder. You don't have to prove intent for murder, but you have to prove intent for almost every other law in America. So the question then becomes, and I don't contradict what you say at all. In fact, I agree with what you say. But then why don't prosecutors show the same leniency and discretion when a person goes into Walmart and steals a $500 item and says, "Oh, I didn't know that I had that vacuum cleaner in my buggy and put it in my car. I didn't mean to do it. Why don't they have the same kind of discretion leniency with that criminal intent as they do with police criminal intent?
Now you're hitting right dead on the nail, okay? And this is what it is. This is what it is. If you sue somebody for medical malpractice, or you sue a lawyer for malpractice, that lawyer's standard of duty of care is higher than the average citizen is for negligence. It's a heightened level of care that he's given because he has the training and the expertise and the experience that should allow him to be able to have a higher level of exercising of his discretion, and also it gives him a higher level of culpability. So the same needs to be implemented. I say this, the same sort of structure and model needs to be adopted to police. Police need to have higher levels, not higher levels of intent, excuse me. I've always struggled with explaining this, but officers have higher levels of training, expertise, and experience. They should not be judged with the same type of leniency as an average citizen uses when using deadly force. He should be judged at a higher level because he has more training and more expertise. Absolutely. And so this is where we're talking about, David, is when I talk about creating laws, right? I want to hold my police officer to a higher level of accountability. We do this with truck drivers. We do this with nurses in this country. We do this with doctors.
School bus drivers. Yeah. School buses.
School teachers. And so what it is we've actually given a lesser standard of care that a police officer is allowed. When you look at those use of force laws, there's Jerry, you tell me if this is the truth for you. Alex, you tell me if this is the truth for you as formable officers. Were you ever scared that if you shot somebody, you would go to jail?
This is Jerry. My answer is no, and let me explain why, because you both are right on with what you're saying. The problem is you've got police investigating police.
There you go.
What you have, we have what's called a reasonable officer standard, which basically means that a reasonable officer with the same amount of training, facing the same amount of the same situation, should react the same way this officer did. If they don't react the same way, then the officer was wrong. The problem is that you've got that thin blue line and the silent wall of silent blue wall where you're not going to speak out against another officer. So what you have is you have the corrupt officer being investigated by another corrupt officer, which gives the prosecutor the findings that they don't feel is sufficient to prosecute. And it's the prosecutor who automatically accepts this and doesn't look at the investigation in a critical manner because politically it's not expedient for them to prosecute a police officer.
Absolutely.
It's detrimental for them to do so.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Baltimore is a prime example of that. The Freddie Gray incident was tantamount to as bad as it can get. You had a citizen who was something happened inside of a van. The police are responsible for the transport, period. When that prosecutor chose to actually investigate that situation to the fullest, the police unions mounted up a huge opposition towards her come election time. And so the answer to that is, I think that there needs to be independent investigatory bodies for police throughout this country. Somebody said that it should be a federal body like the NTSB, and I'd love to hear a conversation about that because I think that I think it should be made up of citizens who are not appointed by mayors. And
here's the thing, Jonathan, and the rest of the team. Over here in the UK, we have what's called a Police Complaints Commission, and they are an independent body that investigate police. So, for example, back in the 80s, we had a whole police force disbanded for corruption. The West Midlands police force was totally disbanded and had to be rebuilt from scratch with new officers, new chiefs, new bosses. The whole establishment, the whole constabulary of that particular region was disbanded, and because there was a handful of officers, right, who controlled majority of what went on in that area, right, they deemed the whole force to be corrupt, and they disbanded the whole lot and had to rebuild it from the beginning. Now, here's the thing. When you have corrupt officers, investigating corrupt officers, with somebody with even more higher power than them, just as corrupt, making sure that those corrupt decisions are enforced, then there is no justice for people who are being victimized daily. There is no hope. There's no reason for a law enforcement officer to come into the job thinking that anything was going to be done any different. And I'm just,
Kervin, Kervin, I'm sorry. I want to add something else too, because I think that what Jonathan and Jerry said about a commission is very, very, very important. But can I speak from another angle? I'd really like to hear the opinion of Yolanda and who's a victim because of her daughter, but also from Jerry and Jonathan to Alex. When a person is convicted in America of a crime, unless you're Scooter Libby or Joe Arpaio and get a presidential pardon, you are forever tattooed with the Scarlet Letter. And in America, the Scarlet Letter is a famous novel, and the letter was an A for adultery, and the woman was exiled forever. The modern Scarlet Letter in America is F, like fish, F, and it means felon. So once you become a felon, you are tattooed forever. You cannot get a good job. You cannot get a government job. You cannot go in the military. You cannot get a security clearance. You can't even be a school truck driver. You have to notify people where you want to rent an apartment that you're a felon. You are forever exiled, tattooed, and branded as unworthy, unequal, unbelievable, undeserving, unworthy, and unfit. You are dehumanized. You're even deprived of the vote in many states, mostly the former slave states, who brand black people with this tattoo of F, the Scarlet Letter F, and they don't want them to vote. Now, all these people, 5 million currently, but probably 20 million people in America with some kind of experience of that nature, 1% of our population is in prison today. Those people are denied the credibility, the knowledge, the opportunity to go out and make the system better. They know the corruption, the illegality, and the immorality. They know it better than anyone, and yet they are the very ones who are deprived under law from contributing in any significant, believable way to making the system better. So you can have all the commissions you want, but they're going to be made up of people who have no experience in the justice system, who feel sorry for people who do, or worse yet, who come under the thumb. Because the minute you go on the police commission, here's what will happen. The chief of police and the sheriff will invite you to the jail. They'll give you the brainwashing. They'll indoctrinate you. They'll tell you how terrible people are. They'll tell you how other towns have crime of the worst nature in the world. And they'll tell you how people who get stopped for traffic tickets create lies so they can get out of them, that the policeman didn't really hit them. The policeman really didn't slap them. The policeman really didn't try to feel them up. They'll create all this aura of police inevitability, and they'll make you a part of the system. And that's why it fails, because if you are a former prisoner, if you are a felon, if you are branded, you won't buy into that, bullshit. You won't buy into it. But Mrs. Smith down the road, the school teacher up the street, the doctor down the avenue, they'll buy into it, and they'll be a part of it.
Just before you guys come in, I just need to make one correction. It wasn't the whole of the West Midlands that was disbanded. It was a serious crime squad that was disbanded. Just wanted to make that correction there before somebody wants to come and sue me. Boom. All right, there we go.
Okay, Kervin, you're fired. That's it. You're fired.
That's it. But
yeah, you know, when you start talking about these groups or bands of cops, you know, this is precisely to what I belong to, which was the focus for the movie Training Day, was these narcotic units, gang units. We had Crash that was also disbanded. You know, because these officers, it wasn't so much the training or as Dr. Romay mentions, you know, having all these elite bodies of governance and things like that. It's a mentality. And when Dr. Romay mentions the Deep South, that's where all this craziness and this madness comes from that continues to play out to this day with the issue of race. And I know people get tired of discussing the subject matter, but that has been, in my humble eyes, the problem here, where you don't have progressive thinking people, whites like Jerry and Dr. Romay and other people that I have worked with that are on the front lines talking about these issues, talking about their white privilege. But that is really, truly my belief, the elephant in the room, because I was a racist. I became a racist towards my own people here, having adopted this brainwash mentality and only waking up once I began investigating the police myself on behalf of civil clients of mine who had been assassinated by the police. At one point, it got so bad with me investigating my own former department that they put my own picture on the police station walls declaring that I was a terrorist, saying that I was conspiring with the gangbangers to assassinate Los Angeles police officers. It was only then that I got a call from a family member who told me, "Knucklehead, what the hell are you doing out there?" And I informed them that I was investigating a case where a police officer had beaten a person to death in the projects and was coming back and telling them that the gang injunctions weren't working and that they were going to put him in the same jail cell number 2 that their homie had passed away in. And somewhere there, someone leaked it out that the next cop was going to go hang out with the gangbangers of a very violent area and to be filming the police. But, you know, the issue of the racism is very strong in that it doesn't just come from the whites. It is now infected Latino officers like myself and even the black officer, too. You can look at the movie that was, Boys of the Hood, John Singleton. And there's one scene where the black officer is telling a young Cuba Gooding Jr., "You're nothing but a nigger," you know, I mean, and there were officers like that, you know, so mad, so angry that they went along with this. And to me, that's the whole problem here, is this charade of everyone going along with the status quo, no one saying anything, because the second you say something and you come forward, you're targeted, exactly with what happened to Jerry and exactly with what also happened to Jonathan. And it's not until you end up getting, spit out by the system that you then come out and speak out, kind of like what we're doing now, ironically.
Well, let me speak for a second, guys. I got a couple of things I want to say. First of all, when it comes to police officers investigating themselves, you would not have drug dealers investigating other drug dealers, prostitutes investigating other prostitutes, pimps investigating other pimps, doctors investigating other doctors. You have a review board for every other thing going on in this world, except for police officers and their activities and the lack of accountability. They want a coworker or someone with a little bit more time on the job to have an objective view of what's going on. We already know, and I appreciate y'all admitting to the culture, but it's a culture that is bred within the police department that is us against them. If you're not wearing a blue uniform or a brown uniform, depending on where you are in the States, everybody else is an enemy and a liar. And you're untouchable because you are wearing that badge. See, these are the things that need to be addressed and debunked. And it should be police officers coming from within the department saying, enough of it. You know, at the end of the day, well, let me take it to a spiritual level for a whole hot second. I'm not going to heaven and standing at the gate waiting to get in, carrying somebody else's lie. It's not going to happen.
Amen.
Because I know I'm not. No. I'm not going to sit up there and try to justify why I lied. That's what I talk about when it comes to the people who were at the party when my daughter was killed. You're sitting up here being quiet, and you're keeping this man's lie
alive.
You haven't thought about the end game. Because see, it's one thing, I'm very patient. When it's something I want, I can be painfully patient. So I'm gonna wait you out. But in the end, when he goes down, I'm gonna get all of you too. I'm a Three Musketeers kind of mentality kind of person. It's one for all and all for all. So whenever somebody wants to sit up there and say, well, it's not true. Yes, it is. Because see, I worked in the same kind of culture. I did security for the water department for the exact same amount of time that this officer had been a police officer by the time he murdered my daughter.
Wow.
Same uniform. I mean, exact same uniform. Same city badge. His said police, mine said security. But I was a first terror alert responder. So I did the same thing he did. I just didn't have a gun. So
right, and Yolanda, if I might say, this is Alex, really quick, hun. You know, you're batting 1,000 here, by the way, on describing the culture of what the problem is, the denial, and also from like what I see is this extreme hatred by a segment out there that hates blacks. And you know, I still yet have to understand, you know, how do we get through that issue, that problem here of being able to look at everybody as human beings rather than on the basis of the color of their skin. I mean, it's been the same thing over and over again that we've discussed, but really, truly, you know, there's some massive brainwashing that's going on there, you know, with this whole King Kong ain't got shit on me type of mentality that comes out with this arrogance where these people feel that they can oppress. It is getting so bad now with people like you losing to people that, you know, when I was in the riots here in Los Angeles, I mean, there was this anger because this had been denied for so long. And so we're reaching that tipping point here again in the United States where it's pretty scary because the United States right now is teetering, I believe, on a civil war. There's a lot of paranoia, there's a lot of fear, and these killings are only being encouraged by the current administration and by having an attorney general who comes from or hails from Selma, Alabama, that infamous bridge, an attorney general who Coretta Scott King didn't even want to have a judgeship. So, you know, this mindset, you know, we have ours, but of course they have theirs, like, you know, F the quote unquote niggers, F these Mexicans, and it's that hatred here that I see as being the problem here that we're trying to expose.
Okay, so let me just quickly jump in here, guys, because you know, we're really looking at this concept of police brutality and what changes and reforms should we be looking at. And yes, we've talked a great deal about the officers' bills of rights, and we're going to be looking at that towards the end of the show. But surely, if we're going to be looking at what changes and reforms need to be made, again, let's go back to the foundation. It goes from the bottom. Training is one of the things that needs to be change, but it's pointless training somebody with the wrong mentality. So surely the first point of change has got to be the way and the type of people that are recruited in order for them to be able to be trained in the right way in the first place. So surely the first protocol is recruitment, right?
Well, no, actually, they need to truly be filtering people, because I'm gonna tell you, racism is the most retarded thing I've ever heard of in my life, and I hate to even give it that step up of saying it's retarded. It's a mental dysfunction that doesn't even have a name. How can you be against people for the color of their skin when you don't have a choice in what color your skin is?
Right. You know,
so how you gonna judge people on that? That doesn't that's not the quality of a person.
Yolanda Curvin, there's a police chief, and I think I mentioned him to you by the name of, Kevin Murphy from Montgomery, Alabama. Montgomery, Alabama, as you know, was the cradle of the Confederacy. It's where that racism crap started. But, you know, one of the things he did when he assumed becoming the police chief of Montgomery, Alabama in 2010 was he got rid of that slogan, cradle of the Confederacy, from those police officers' badges. Did you imagine that these guys were gloating every time they killed a black person? The cradle of the Confederacy cop from Montgomery was killing him. So that was one of the first big things that he did, was he got rid of that slogan. The next thing he did was he made his officers sit and go to the Rosa Parks Museum where they had to sit in the back of the bus, you know, and I guess the thing that got him kind of fired or out of there was when he apologized to John Lewis, the congressional civil rights leader who got his ass beat crossing Selma, you know, by the racist Confederate, you know, relics back in 1965 during Bloody Sunday after they crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge. He apologized, he atoned, this white man, for everything the police department had done, specifically the Montgomery, you know, police department. But, you know, it was a mindset that he atoned. They call it the apology heard around the world. But I think that really that's what it becomes, is us, you know, he put it out there, you know, the elephant in the room. He says, hey, we're sorry. You know, I made my officers go to the Rosa Parks Museum. They learned about our place in history. We got rid of that craziness on the badge. And to do things. I mean, and this is where it all starts, I believe, is when you look at this problem and you deal with it, because so many of our ancestors have died since that time, whether through forms of lynching, and no one ever said anything. This officer, this police chief, he finally did.
You kind of have a mentality of people where you know, let's forget about the individual groups that go out and protest, because 9 times out of 10, the individual groups that go out there and protest are actually not the ones that are out on the streets when those crimes are being committed against the community. Until you start getting people who witness police brutality standing up and telling the truth and not being afraid, and then getting the proper protection that they should get when they're going into court to give evidence and believed. You're not going to have.
But Kervin, let me say this on this. What Yolanda said about racism and Alex. In America today, we would like to believe what you said is true. If people see police brutality, if they see a policeman take Rodney King out of a car and beat the living hell out of him, we would like to believe that people would stand up and do the right thing, but they don't. America is now a tribal society. We have de-evolved from an advanced society, the result of the Enlightenment, that that makes decisions after looking for knowledge, scientific evidence, hypotheses, theses, rational thought. We are now like reptiles. Everything is hot and cold, based on a tribal allegiance. Now take, for example, Kavanaugh, this man nominated to the court. The minute this 15-year-old girl, who was 15 years old, revealed the story of how he tried to sexually molest her and brutalize her, all the Trump people, the Republicans, those people who voted for Trump because they could not stand a woman and hated Barack Obama to the marrow of their racist bones, immediately sided with this wealthy, elite, Yale-educated, multimillionaire, privileged liar Kavanaugh. On the other hand, all those people like me, the people who have empathy, understand, have a democratic view of life, want law enforcement, but one that protects the best of America's traditions, we immediately said, let us hear from the woman. We didn't say she was raped. We didn't say she was right. We didn't say anything but let us hear. They don't even want an FBI investigation. They don't want witnesses. They don't want to hear. And they're preparing to lynch this woman who is a professor at a school affiliated with Stanford University. Because, Kervin, we would like to think that people would do the right thing when they see malignancy and evil, but they don't. They line up in America with their tribal base, their Trump cult, their Republican ideologues from hell itself. And what do? They don't care about truth. They don't care about justice. And they don't care about right and wrong, good and bad. They only care about their tribe. And until we break this tribal culture based in racism, the original sin of the 13 colonies that became the United States of America, until that day is reached, we will have the repeat of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in 1,000 different versions.
Oh, you know, it sounds like we're so far away from where we need to be as a people, as a race, as a nation. But
Perfect. Can I jump in?
absolutely.
This is Jerry. I agree with Doctor, and I agree with I just drew a blank.
Yolanda
and
Alex.
Alex is the other one I was thinking of too. I agree with them all. What they're saying is correct. You asked the question, should it be training from the bottom up? And I would agree with that to some extent, but it's a systemic problem, and a systemic problem has to be addressed from the top down. There has to be accountability at the sheriff level, at the chief's level, at the prosecutors level. And what we're seeing is there's not. And when there's not an accountability, and because there's no transparency, so the general public doesn't get to know what's going on, then you have the ability for those in power to silence those who are not in power. That's exactly what this woman against Judge Kavanaugh is coming up against. They're demanding all kinds of proof, and she can't be anonymous. Nobody will investigate an anonymous complaint. You see that in law enforcement. You can make a complaint against an officer, but unless you're willing to come forward, we're not going to investigate it. And that's a problem, because what happens then is people are afraid to come forward in order to reveal who they are because of the retaliation that occurs. And then what happens is they are silenced. So you have people who are recognizing that it's wrong, but they're afraid to come forward because they know what the consequences are coming forward to reveal that. And until there's a greater transparency throughout, you're never going to get that happening. And we're seeing that from the top down. We see that from the judges are supposed to be holding the prosecutors accountable for their lives, and the prosecutors are supposed to be holding the law enforcement officials, and the officials of law enforcement are supposed to be handling their subordinates in an appropriate manner. And because the whole system is based on self-policing, and self-policing is broken because they're not holding each other accountable, there's no way to fix it.
Jerry, can I add, Carvin, let me add to Jerry. Jerry made a very good point. Hello?
Yeah, go ahead. We can hear you.
Let me add to what, that was Jerry, right? Who just spoke? Now, Jerry said you have to go from the top down and hold people responsible. I agree 1,000%. And I believe that those of us who are working for justice in America have a very simple solution. If only we could get the state legislature in the several states to do it. And that is U.S. district attorneys and prosecutors, as opposed to federal prosecutors, are elected. A U.S. attorney is appointed by the president, but district attorneys and prosecutors, state prosecutors, are elected. And they claim this mantle of sovereignty, a divine right. No one can question their decision but the voters in the ballot box. Well, the fact is, there's one state that changed that, and now New York has just changed it. And they have put the Attorney General of the state over elected prosecutors, so that an elected prosecutor can actually be dismissed, punished, or fired by the Attorney General. And until these elected states, district attorneys and state prosecutors, until they can be held accountable to a person, not to the voters, there will be no change in their almost godlike powers. And let me quote Robert Jackson. He was the U.S. Supreme Court Justice who stepped down under Roosevelt, under Truman, appointed by Roosevelt, stepped down under Truman to become the American chief prosecutor in Nuremberg, one of the most brilliant men ever to serve on the Supreme Court. And he said, the prosecutor in the United States has more control over life, liberty, and reputation than any other person in America, including the president. His discretion is tremendous. He can have life and death decisions without ever being questioned. until those little twerps, like in Texas or Alabama or Mississippi, these little racist county prosecutors can take a man, frame him, put him before a grand jury of his friends, have him indicted, put him before a trial of a jury he selects, and put that man to death, all in a matter of months. That's the kind of power. He has more power than a president or a king of the United States or England. Now think of that. Until, as Jerry said, those people are held responsible, there is no hope whatsoever for justice in the United States. And no policeman will ever be brought under control.
You know, that is so powerful and so true. It can leave some of us speechless at times, David, but there has to be a way forward for accountability. Otherwise, we offer no hope. We have to offer hope.
I just gave it. The legislature must hold prosecutors accountable. And when a prosecutor, like in Dallas, Texas, a policewoman goes to an apartment of a black man, he's got a big, big, bright rug in front of his door. She doesn't have a bright rug in front of her door. She opens his door and she shoots him dead. And there are people in Texas saying, well, why was he in her apartment? It wasn't her damn apartment. It was his apartment. She opened the door to another man's apartment, and he was black, and she shot him dead. That goes to what Yolanda says. I'm not going to take another man's lie to heaven with me. And I guarantee you, without social network, without people like Alex, without people like Yolanda, you and me and Jerry, Jonathan, all of us, if we didn't make a big deal out of it, that would, 15 years ago, that would have been swept right under his little red carpet. He would have been buried, and that police officer would be chief of police somewhere.
And you know, the funny thing is, go ahead, jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention and echo everything that's being said here with respect to Dr. Romay and Jerry, that, you know, the underlying thing of this whole deal that's going on right now in human history, this modern time where we're using the internet to talk over the seas and you're in England, is that all this stuff is coming out that has been present for the longest, and that it can't be concealed anymore. As with the Catholic Church, we're looking at just how many children were abused now on a whole higher level that was never disclosed before. Children that were murdered by priests and nuns, and I don't have anything against the Church of the Almighty Creator, but I mean, humankind has really had a warped history in its shame and secrecy of hiding things. And so really, to me, it becomes more than, you know, just, you know, the legislature and things like that, you know, dealing with man's rules for itself, because it has only benefited, you know, the white man. And we know that when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, that it really wasn't all men that were created equal, because there was a large segment of slaves that were seen as anything. And so we continue to go back to the same issue here of what's happening and what's going on. And you know, it just doesn't seem to stop that we're still discussing these same issues that happened a long time ago, you know?
You know, sorry, let me just jump in very, very quickly. You see, it's easy for us to come up with statistics when we're talking about something else. You know, you can talk about how many children were abused in this particular country by this church. You can talk about how many Palestinians were killed on the Gaza Strip. We can talk about how many women are raped, etc. But when we're talking about police brutality, it seems like they're killed by cops. The numbers, the stats are being renewed every year. Jonathan spoke at the beginning, earlier on in the show, and spoke about the numbers in 2018. But we're seeing close to 2,000 killed every year. Every year. And that's since they've been counting. So you don't have that many people killed in a war. You didn't have that many killed in Afghanistan. You didn't have that many killed in Iraq. You haven't had that many killed in Syria, right? On any of those given years. Now, when we start accumulating those years and we start talking about how many has been killed since 2015 or since 2010 or since 2000, the number becomes absolutely catastrophic. How do we justify the amount of people being killed without seeing some sort of purpose to change?
But it's because they dehumanize African Americans, Hispanics, and poor white people. They dehumanize them. Once you dehumanize a human being, like Hitler said to the Jews, you're not humans, you're rats, you're rodents, you're an infestation, then it's easy to put them in prison, to abuse them, to treat them. Yes, to make nothing out of them. Once you no longer see a black person as a human being, what's the limit? I mean, it's just you're an animal. We just kill you. And so while we speak of top down, we also have to tell children and teach children about empathy, about compassion, about the brilliance of the diversity of God's world. God didn't make all chickens look the same. He didn't even make all their eggs look the same. He didn't make all the fishes of the sea look the same. How boring would it be if he made all humans with the same color, the same features, the same gifts, the same disadvantages, the same advantages? We have to teach this from the beginning. Teach less about the punishments in the Bible, the hatreds in the Bible, the smashing of babies' heads against the walls, about exterminating an entire group of people because they showed their asses to Moses in the desert. We have to forget this. We have to think about the inclusion, the love, the compassion, the empathy, all the very things that make us human and loving and beautiful, the very things that Donald Trump doesn't understand one damn thing about. One thing about. All he does is talk hatred. He's already attacked this woman, telling her, bring forward the evidence of your report. Well, let me ask you, if a 15-year-old girl didn't report that a 17-year-old tried to rape her, does that mean it didn't happen? Does that mean that the millions of children in Ireland, Germany, Italy, New Zealand, Australia, America, and Canada coming forth after 50 years saying priests raped them, molested them, dehumiliated them, does that mean it didn't happen to those millions of people? Does it mean because a Jewish victim of Auschwitz didn't report it to the police when she was liberated from the camp in 1945? Does that mean it didn't happen? We have to have compassion and empathy and love and respect. But as long as white people in America who vote for Donald Trump and who believe the ideas he believes, as long as they exist, and they can't die off too soon, as long as they exist, we will have the racism that leads to the permissive environment in which the police can walk into an apartment and shoot someone dead and never pay a price.
Right. And Dr. Romay, this is Alex here, really quick. Just wanted to mention and follow up with you. You having worked in the Deep South and becoming a target yourself of some of those very vicious and vindictive people, with this prevalent now, in my opinion, being a child, my dad was a Civil War buff. And so at age 8 and 9, I was studying Pickett's Charge and all these battles, Antietam and what have you, Sherman's March. And behind it was all this anger that, hasn't been seen until that time period. Going back then, I can only imagine it's always been present. But, how do you deal with, the issue that we have an attorney general whose name is Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, named after the former Confederate president, named after a Confederate general. Okay, and this man is the top law enforcement officer of the United States of America, a man who was 20 years, give or take, at the time when the Selma beating happened in 1965, Bloody Sunday, when they crossed that bridge. Where was this man at that time period? Age 20, where all these angry faces about these niggas, as they would have said, as they killed activists, white people too, who were there present, the Luuzo family, whose, sister there had gone there to, help out the blacks, and the priest, a white priest who was killed there, marching with these people. I mean, that's what has never been discussed here. And when you have a president that has opened up the floodgates of Pandora's box to all this, and you have this attorney general with this such a very unique name that comes from where, where Kevin Murphy apologized, Chief Kevin Murphy apologized to John Lewis. What gives here? I mean, what summarizes this behavior, this moment in time, where we have to really look at and open up the door to what's been going on for the ages, but that has never truly been acknowledged until now.
Boom! You just took the words out my mouth, Alex. I mean, David, I don't know what are the age brackets of everybody that's here. I'm 46. Alex, I know you mean you're the same age. How old are you, David?
I'm 60.
60. Okay, you're my mom's generation. I'm
60.
Jerry, you guys are 60. So you're not, you graduated in what, 1984, 85?
From what, university or college? From
high school.
No, high school, 76.
76. 75, I'm 51.
76. I want to ask this question because I know it from my generation.
Wait 1 second. Since I'm born in January, I'm probably older than my fellow 60-year-olds, so all of you better behave. Now go ahead.
I was born in August, so you're the spokesman here.
I'm the senior. I'm the senior.
You guys can account for your generation. I can account for my generation. The next generation below me can account for. They've already said it, articulated it. Alex just hit it on the head, though. We've never had a serious acknowledgement from white folks in this country as to the history of atrocities that have been done in this country. A little while ago, Dave, you said, and I know you're passionate, and I believe in everything that you mean here. You said that we have devolved as a country. That would assume that we have, at one point, we were evolved, but we have never been a bastion of enlightenment in this country. And that's one of the wonderful marketing gist of America, is that what we have been is a bastion of hiding the truth of the things that have been done on the backs of other ethnic groups. We stole this land from the Native Americans. We worked this land with slaves. We built our railroads with Chinese free labor. We've done all of these things to bring us to this point, but we have never had a true open-throated conversation about the atrocities that have been done. And when we talk about police accountability, if we ever want to have a truly top-down conversation about police accountability, the very first thing, it started back in 2016, 17, there was an international chiefs of police meeting that took place. I think the gentleman's name was Cunningham. He apologized to African Americans, to minorities in particular, about the things that police have done in our communities.
But what was the blowback effect? He got attacked for saying that.
Yeah, the blowback for him was, they went berserk on him. How dare he apologize to minorities for the hard work that the police have done in protecting America against these brown and black people. So I love the passion, but what bothers me sometimes is that when we truly talk about police accountability and getting to the crux of this thing, it is that America was built on and sustained on and is maintained on open white supremacy, period. And the police and our court systems have been the agents of that. They have been the sustainers of that. And until white people really have that conversation amongst themselves, do we really want to be this way? We can expect nothing more, nothing different.
Jonathan, let me defend myself a second. I love what you're saying. When I said we as a country are devolving, what I mean is one can devolve without ever being evolved. For example, I could be a 4-month pregnancy and I'm far worse off than I was at 1 month, and I'm not going to be 8 months or 9 months as a human. So I have gotten worse as an embryo without ever becoming a human. Now, wait, let me finish. Go ahead.
You said was that at some point we were like enlightened, and
I'm saying America was founded on the ideas of the Enlightenment, that we would be rational thinkers. Now, let me say this: we were far worse off in 1860 for black people than we were in 1865 after the Civil War. We were far better off in 1964, 65, 66 with Lyndon Johnson's Voter Rights Amendment, the Civil Rights Act, Dr. Martin Luther King. We were advancing, we were evolving. And suddenly Reagan got elected, gave his first speech in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where 2 Jews and a black man were murdered in cold blood, and we began to devolve again. So America is not circular and it's not vertical, but we zigzag. And we were going up in the 60s and 70s. And now in the 80s and 90s, and especially with Trump, we have zigzagged like a stock market, and we're headed for bottom. That's what I meant to say, sir.
I understand.
There are times when we're coming in the right direction, but at the moment we're not coming in the right direction, and we have to ask ourselves why. As Alex said, what has unleashed people like Jeffrey Beauregard Sessions III from Mobile and Selma and Montgomery? What has released people in Mississippi and Lindsey Graham in South Carolina? And why would a black Republican from South Carolina, a black senator of the United States from South Carolina, the very place that started police in America to capture runaway slaves, the very place where the Civil War began when Fort Sumter was shot upon, the very place where they hung black people from every palm tree they could find, the very place where they stole black land along the coast of Charleston so they could sell it to their rich white northern friends, the very place, South Carolina, you have a black, an African-American United States Senator who's going to vote with Trump on this Kavanaugh, who will reverse the Shelby laws, reverse civil rights, reverse Voting Rights Act, reverse the Justice Department measure to increase justice in America. He will reverse every type of social benefit that should accrue to African Americans who helped build this country and deserve a right to live in liberty as everyone else. Why is Tim Scott an African American voting that way?
So you know, so I'm gonna pull out my black card here, okay? Just so you know. Black people have been dealing with that fucking boogeyman for their entire lives, okay? For the last 400 years. Donald Trump is no more of a boogeyman than the stuff that's been going on the last 400 years here in America. We don't get really motivated by those speeches anymore about the big bad boogeyman. Now, I'm going to tell you something. It is going to get a lot worse in America because he's in office, right? But it's pretty much been the bottom for us all throughout the history of this thing. We've got some little tiny gains. When we had Barack Obama in, we saw the backlash that came to America. I don't take issue with anything that you're saying about Donald Trump, okay? What I'm saying is that until we really, truly have a full-throated conversation about the things that have been done in America, we'll never really have an honest conversation about the things that are done in America through police and through our criminal justice system. The reason why racism still exists in America to the extent and level that it does right now is because it's been comfortable for other people. It doesn't really affect the large majority of Americans. It only affects the 13 to 14% of blacks, and it only affects the 19 to 20% of people of color, my brown folks. So racism is what it is in this country because it really hasn't bothered a lot of people. It hasn't bothered enough people. When we see what we saw the last 3 or 4 years here, right? I say this because it bothers me. It just, you know, our liberal and progressive friends are great at these passionate orations. When Me Too stepped out here, they marched for women's rights. When the Dreamers stepped out here, they marched for women's rights, right? Nobody really gave a damn about police accountability at all, period, point blank, as long as there's black blood in the streets. In fact, when we started marching and talking about this stuff, people called us terrorists. And until we get to the part of actually having a conversation about that, all the rest of this stuff about Donald Trump and what's happening overseas, nobody gives a rip about that. I'm going to be honest with you. Nobody does. Because until a black man can sit in his house and not be shot by the cop who's at his doorstep accidentally, nobody gives a damn about Donald Trump.
For real. So, Yolanda.
Let me jump in here just a minute. The cop that shot the black man in Texas, it's being alleged that she had a relationship with him. So it's more than just a racist thing. It's an actual.
But Jerry, that's rumor. Okay, she didn't have it verifiable. What they have was they do have noise complaints coming from that area. Okay, she allegedly gave noise complaints. Her partner was directly below his, and there was previous complaints of noise that day, and so. That scenario, the way it's been represented in the media, the details will eventually come out. But there's 2 witnesses that say that she has a couple of that they heard people saying, heard her say, "Let me in, let me in." And so it's more it's more probable that she went up there to complain about noise. The dude opened the door. It's this big black guy. She got scared and she shot him. You know, I mean, that's more probable. But
well, I'm not saying there wasn't a racist thing involved in here. I was just trying to add there was a greater dimension in there. And I you know, everything sounds like, and I'm not disagreeing with anything Jonathan or David or Yolanda or Kervin or even you have said. I agree that there have been incredible atrocities in the United States. And we've always picked a group of people. I mean, it was Italians, it was Polish, it was blacks, it was Chinese, it was Hispanic, it was Asian. This culture has always had a group of people or groups of people that it has made less than normal or dehumanized, as a doctor would say, or David would say. And when we do that, then it's easy to suppress any one of those individuals, whether it's based on skin color, socioeconomic standing, or even intelligence level. We tend to, as a culture, dehumanize a group of individuals, and that group of individuals that is being dehumanized is the group that gets suppressed.
Well, let us not forget.
One second, Dave. Let me. I mean, I've kind of listened intently, and I've heard a lot of toing and throwing. But I want to say this, and I'm probably throwing in my black card into the camp too. For years, even here in the UK, sometimes you hear people say things like, "Oh no, it's not that bad. You know, you guys don't have it that bad anymore," and you hear these things all the time. But they're not me. They're still not confronting what I confront on a daily basis. We don't want to get this twisted. We don't want to get this mixed up. This discussion here today is about the police brutality which is being administered by an organization, an authority against the people, against the nation, right? And trying to pick out one individual guy or one individual vote or one individual state as the cause for what has been going on for decades in the United States of America. We're losing the plot here, right? There is systematic bad policing, corruption, killed by cops issues taking place daily on the streets of America in every state. And the killed by cop statistics don't only pinpoint black folk out on the streets. The police have got out of control. The police are policing themselves. They are investigating themselves over crimes that they are committing against the people of the nation that they have been given an opportunity and a privilege to protect and serve, right? And until we look at the institution, right, that is acting in a corrupt and criminal manner, we're not going to solve any of the problems that we're looking at on the streets of the communities, whether it be Chicago, Los Angeles, or Florida, right? The way it is, looking at the rights that protect a police officer, when he messes up, you and I can go out on the street today and we mess up. And a guy passing by in his police vehicle with his badge can pick us up and put us in the back of that vehicle and take us under arrest and put us in jail until we face a judge. Why can't the same be done for a corrupt officer who has just killed an innocent individual on the street? Because that's what the man and the woman who's sitting at home wants to know.
Absolutely.
So can I add to that, Kervin?
Go ahead.
Now I want to go back to something, and I agree with what you say, but what Jerry was saying about how we have dehumanized so many minorities in America, it's important to remember one that he left off was the first, and that's the Native American, which was basically a genocide. The Puritans who settled this country had the idea that God selected them, white English Protestants from England, to rule the world. And everyone else can be put to death, can be put to work, or could be ignored. But they cannot interfere with the white evangelical Puritan Christian from England. And the Native Americans suffered more than any. And while we build Holocaust museums for what Germans did to Jews in Washington, we almost ignore what we did to the Native American Indian. So when we want to make compensation, and as Jonathan said, acknowledge our crimes against African Americans, we begin with the Native American. And then we go to the African American. And then we go to women and gays and homosexuals and everybody else who this select group, in their mind, selected by God himself, have chosen. Now, on the other issue that I want to address is this idea that Trump doesn't matter. And Jonathan, forgive me, but I'm going to push back a little bit. 2 years ago on this show.
I didn't say he doesn't matter. I said he doesn't matter as much as you're claiming that he matters.
Okay. Well, 2 years ago on this very radio station, and Kervin will verify this, not that I need verification, I argued vehemently that it matters whether or not Hillary or Trump is elected. And we had any number of guests who said, it doesn't matter, they're both corrupt, they're both terrible, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. Well, now that racism is unleashed, hatred is at a level never seen before, division is at a demolition level, and crimes and wars against African Americans, Native Americans, gay people, and women. Rape is accepted. Girls are not believed. No one is safe. The debt is going up. The Justice Department is corrupt. The FBI and other law enforcement that could protect us is being destroyed. While all this is going on, I want to go back to those people now and say, really? There's no difference between Hillary and Donald Trump? No difference? So when you say that Trump doesn't matter in the big picture, that nobody gives a damn what Trump does or thinks abroad or at home, you're dead wrong. Because Trump's war in Iran and Israel and Russia and North Korea, wherever he goes to create more mischief, will only give his henchmen in this country more cover to do harm to the minorities, to African Americans, to gay people, to women, and to everybody else in this country. While he has his little shiny fish and distractions in the world, North Korea is going to drop an atom bomb fighting in Africa.
This question,
believe me.
This question: if your house was on fire, would you give a shit about your neighbor's house? Huh? If your house was on fire, if your house was on fire, if your house was on fire, would you care one bit about your neighbor's house? You put out the fire in your own house first, wouldn't you?
If my house was on fire, so that somebody could
for 400 years, and you what I'm
let me answer. 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 Let me answer.
About what was happening overseas. I said that in our sequence of priorities, we don't give a damn about that as much as we care about our own safety and security here first.
Have you ever been, let me ask you something. Have you ever seen this little trick? You're walking down the street and somebody bumps into you, and then they say, oh, I'm so sorry. And while they're bumping into you, somebody else has just pickpocketed you and taken your wallet. If somebody puts my house on fire, so my wife will run outside and they'll kidnap her and rape her. Yes, I don't give a damn about my house being on fire. I care about my wife's safety. Now that's my answer to you. So what Trump is doing is putting a house on fire so he can put you further into the bonds of slavery. And you think it's not important what he's doing. It's
we really need to draw this back, gentlemen. We need to really draw this back because I think we've gone way offline.
Way off the top. It's about police accountability and brutality, and we're just.
Let's reel it all back in, guys. Let's get it back. Let's get back on track, and let's look at what it is that we're trying to accomplish here today. Looking at police brutality and looking at the accountability. I wanted to remind you of the statement that we looked at a couple of weeks ago that opened our eyes and raised that question. And that was on the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, where it said this. The Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights is intended to protect American law enforcement personnel from investigation and prosecution arising from conduct during official performance of their duties and provides them with privileges based on due process additional to those normally provided to other citizens. Now, that when we look at that argument and that statement, what does that say to you, Jonathan?
It tells me that law enforcement's looking for additional protections under the law, which they should not be entitled to. If they follow their policies and procedures and they do what they're supposed to do, the system will do what it's supposed to do. If they continue to exceed their authority, they have no right to have additional protections under the law.
And Yolanda, when you hear that, how does that make you feel as an individual, knowing that your daughter's life was taken at the hands of somebody who's actually protected just because he wears the badge? Hi, Yolanda.
You know, Kervin, I'll add that it's a
Can you hear me?
self-preservation.
Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
I thought I was talking.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Yolanda.
Okay. As I said, it disgusts me. I've been in security for over 20 years. I've had 8 felony arrests, 5 convictions, and 3 people doing life. But at no time did I mistreat anybody. Did I think that I was better than anybody? And no, I did not value my life more than theirs, other than the fact that I knew that I intended to go home to my family. These police officers think that they're untouchable and that this is a game. Life is taking somebody's life is a game. It's open season on people of color. It's open season on poor people. It's open season on mentally ill people. And the fact of the matter is, it's more mentally ill people working for the police department than they are out on the streets.
Amen.
You know, when you start looking at these officers' bills of rights, it's quite clear. Not only do they need to be rewritten, the whole concept and principles of which they were built needs to be rethought. Where do you stand on that, Jerry?
I agree with you. I think the foundation is there. It's just not being enforced. An officer is entitled to due process just like a citizen, no more, no less. Their actions should be judged like a citizen's, no more and no less. Unfortunately, that's not the way the system works. And that's got to change. And that's got to be changed through transparency, and it's got to be changed through training. When we go back to your training question on the bottom up, you know, the average officer, 97% of his job requires communication skills, and yet less than 10% of their training is based on communication skills. Probably less than, even less than that. Probably, I would guess somewhere around 4 or 5% is spent on how to engage people, how to talk with them, how to de-escalate issues and situations, how to deal with a mentally ill person, and how to talk to a mentally ill person. Instead, it's the enforcement now is I'm gonna ask you once, I'm gonna tell you, and then I'm gonna make you, and that just doesn't work. They have to be more skilled than the average citizen in communication and de-escalation. That's a bottom-up training. The top-down is that the whole culture has to change and has to hold itself accountable, because if it doesn't, then it's going to, and this is what we're seeing now, outside supervision needs to occur. And yet across the country, you'll see Boise City had an ombudsman. And when a chief of police came in, he said, a new chief of police came in, he said, my first job is to get rid of that ombudsman. Now, he happened to do a good job in holding his officers accountable. He subsequently retired, and new chiefs come in, and that changed the culture based on holding those officers accountable. And it appears that culture is being carried forward. We have another city in which every officer and every department head has started at the bottom and worked their way up to the top, and it's maintained a culture in that city that's known for its ethics and its integrity. We need to do that throughout the United States with our law enforcement, and the top dogs have to be held accountable.
What we need to do is remove the police officer privilege.
I agree. Absolutely.
They feel entitled to more, and they aren't anything but a citizen that took an oath and wears a badge. There's nothing more special about them. So the heinous crimes that they commit should be treated exactly like that way. If I shoot somebody and I have to go to jail for it, they should have to go to jail when they shoot somebody. There's no in between.
I agree with you 100%. In fact, it was Sir Robert Peel that said the citizens are the police and the police are the citizens. The only difference is that the citizens have given the police an increased authority by the badge, and in return for that, they expect that badge to be honored, and they expect the officers to act and conduct themselves above reproach. That's just not happening.
Yeah, they're bullies, and that's it.
You know, Jonathan, when we look at what we're just talking about here, there has to be a way forward in changing these rules, changing these laws, making them more understandable to Joe Public. And I mean, the most important thing is that the public, the citizens, have got to feel that they're protected by these officers, not just the officers protected by their laws.
That's right. When we talked about earlier, when we talked about doing oversight commissions, it was posited that that those commissions won't be really a good idea because they won't include people that are felonized, that have been convicted as a felon and so forth. I think the very first step of accountability is community ownership of police. Period. Our tax dollars pay for it, just like our tax dollars are prosecuting wars all across this world, right? We go to sleep every night dropping bombs on other countries, but we also go to sleep every night knowing that 6 or 7 people across this country have been shot by the police. And those review boards need to be made up of no more than 3 police officers or police chiefs, 3 lawyers to help interpret the law, and the rest of them need to be citizens. And when I say citizens, I'm talking 6 folks who are just regular citizens and 6 returning citizens. That's the model that I talk about. And so that you have true accountability, and you start really looking at investigations from an independent standpoint. People that absolutely have no skin in the game, they're neutral and detached, and you bring to them a set of facts, and you give them subpoena power, and you give them the same as our Congress has. When there's something that affects the entire population of people, the Congress and the Senate have the ability to bring people before them and question them under oath and investigate things. And that's the same thing that needs to happen with these police shootings and police killings and excessive force scenarios. Instead, we have a lot of pushback when it comes to independent oversight of the police, and a lot of pushback when it comes to citizen-involved oversight of the police. People want to have commissions, but they want to have them appointed by the mayor. Those become political appointments, and people who are not representative of the communities that those types of oversight commissions are supposed to oversee, represent.
There is power when the people have a say.
Absolutely.
And I suppose the one thing that we will say is that, even if we flip back to the Trump argument, the people had power to vote. Now, I don't know how your American system works, especially in relation to appointing and voting for either sheriffs or mayors or chiefs of police, etc. But being educated on what they're voting for and what power they're giving to those that they're voting for should help them understand who and what they're putting in power over them. So is this officer's Bill of Rights, is this, I can just Google it and read it here, but how much of this this information is discussed, debated, scrutinized in order for people to really make an informed decision?
Kervin, you didn't ask me my opinion.
Go on,
but I'm going to offer it anyway.
Go ahead.
This is David. We already have a Bill of Rights, and the Bill of Rights is to curtail the power of the government and its agents, such as police. I think the Bill of Rights is quite sufficient for the police as it is for everyone else if we want to have what we call equality under the law. When we have a Bill of Rights for those who are charged with the possibility of killing us to enforce the government's rights, we have a real problem. And those policemen should have no less nor more power than we have, or any more rights than we have. And for example, if I commit a crime, if I go and beat the living dickens out of someone right now, the police are going to put me in a room, and within 24 hours, they're going to get a statement from me, or they're going to make me give a statement, or I'm going to exercise my rights under the Miranda warnings and the Fifth Amendment and be quiet. But a policeman under this bill has 10 days before he can be questioned. 10 days to talk to lawyers, his police union, his colleagues, his chief, and to get his story straight. And they will get that story straight. So by the time, like the Freddie Gray incident came about and the police will question, oh, we took him with no problem. They don't even mention the fact they broke his spine by driving him around without protection in a van. So until we can have an independent, non-related force looking into the actions of the police, until we make sure we have equality under the law and they don't have special privileges, as Yolanda pointed out, until those days happen, we will not have equality under the law, we will not have justice, and we will not bring about the America, whatever they call it, make America great again, that these people are delusional about. Because as I said at the beginning, without justice, there can be no peace.
Jerry, are you still with us, my friend?
I am, yes, sir.
How do we improve this police force that you put your heart and soul into when you first joined? That would make you proud again. Where would you start? I know I've asked you this question before, but we're coming up towards the end.
Quickly, I would get rid of the Bill of Rights. I mean, the police officers' Bill of Rights. I mean, there is no reason. The law is the law, and the police are not do not have any more special special privileges than the average citizen. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we absolutely must fix the transparency issues within law enforcement. I mean, if I can operate without anybody questioning me, that's just grounds for corruption. That's the basis for corruption. That has to be opened up. The average citizen has to be able to see investigations and get to the investigations that are being done. And ultimately, we need an oversight board that is made up of citizens, as Jonathan would say, of all walks of life and all, whether they've been convicted or not, it doesn't matter. It needs to be representative of the community, as well as somebody from law enforcement who understands the policies and procedures and how law enforcement works. I'm not excusing their behavior, but there has to be a knowledgeable person on that board. And I think Jonathan has pointed that out. He's got a very large board. I don't know that I would go to 12 or 15 people on the board, but we need to fix the transparency laws, and we need to hold and we need to fix the qualified immunity, and definitely the absolute immunity for judges and prosecutors.
Jonathan, we are really coming up towards the end here. Did you want to summarize anything before I go to Yolanda?
No, I'd love to hear from Yolanda. She hadn't spoke much, and I feel bad because we might have dominated the conversation.
Yeah, I kind of feel that too. Come on, Yolanda.
I'd love to hear from her.
Well, my perspective on it is this. Yes, there should be a citizen oversight committee for every level, because the corruption we know is like a virus, and once it takes hold, it is impossible to eradicate without removing, everybody. We need to be able to work together as people and accept each other as people, because there's nothing less human about me than there is about anybody else out there. I could use the Constitution's idea of one drop of black blood as an example of us not being less human. And then in a way that kind of makes us superior, because one drop of blood makes whatever other race we're mixed with black. But a white man cannot give a drop of blood to anybody else and change their race. He cannot make a white baby with a black person. He can't make a white baby with an Indian. He can't make a white baby with a Chinese or a Mexican person. But a black person within the confines of the United States, that person is already considered black. We also have to change the image and the perception of people looking at us from the outside, because they're starting to buy in. These other countries are starting to buy in that there's something less than about us. So when people move to different countries, they're treated badly because they see it happening here and they think monkey see, monkey do. And we need to change that. You know, it's about what you accept and what you decide is unacceptable. Those are the differences.
Well, guys, we've actually really come to this. We've really come to the end of the show, and I've got 20 seconds left, and I've got no time for anybody else to contribute. I'm really apologetic about that. We've really eaten up the whole of these 2 hours, but we're going to have to come around this table again, and we're going to have to do this all over again, one more time, I believe. So I'll speak to you all guys individually right after this. But yeah, thank you all. It's Dr. David Ramey, Alex Salazar, Jerry Summers, Jonathan Newton, and the very Honourable Yolanda McNair. Thank you guys for your contribution, and we will catch up later, no doubt. There's so much more to come. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Imperial Lounge presents an icon.
Reggae dancehall by the beach. To be held at Imperial Lounge, 2 to 14 High Street, Margate Seafront, Kent, CT9 180. To be held on the first Saturday of each month. Your host DJ Matt. Also rotating DJs, Roger Boone, DJ Happy,
and Younger General.
Doors open 8 p.m. till late. Free entry all night. Music policy, reggae, dancehall, and a touch of soul. On the first Saturday of each month.
Reggae dancehall by the beach.
At the Imperial Lounge Margate. Do remember, you can also get VIP and Shisha booking. More info on the World Jam Global website. That's www.worldjamglobal.com. Also www.imperialloungemargate.co.uk.
See you there.
It's the right thing you do.
Do you like music like this?
Great music all the time.
Or like this?
The music you love.
Maybe this.
Great music that makes you want to turn up the volume loud.
Or life chat like this.
Especially where human life is concerned. Surely, sooner or later, people will realize that lives actually matter.
Then you're in the right place. Keep it locked to World Jam Global, where music is harmony.
Music 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Yeah, you're a World Jam. Hotter than them.
See live schedule.